Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. Today I want to talk to you about what happens when one of your Crested Gecko breeding projects fails. It's inevitable that if you plan on breeding Crested Geckos for any amount of time, you're eventually going to have a breeding project that fails completely, where you don't get any babies from the project and it feels like a complete waste of your time. And so I want to share with you a short story about a project that I had that failed this last year and what my plans are going forward. I think it's a valuable lesson because this is something that can be very frustrating to some people, and I believe something that can eventually make people leave the hobby and believe that Crested Gecko breeding is not for them. So first, a short story for you about one of my Crested Gecko breeding projects that completely failed this last year is my Het Axanthic project. This is something that was one of my main projects, I would say, for 2022, or hopefully one of my main projects for the 2022/2023 breeding season. I had purchased a Het Axanthic male Crested Gecko last spring. This was an adult male. He was ready to breed. He's very beautiful. He's kind of like a dark reddish maroon color with kind of a lot of white creamy spots. He's a very beautiful male. He's very tame as well, but anyway, I had purchased this male in spring. He was one of the most expensive geckos I had ever purchased up until that point. And my goal with him, like I mentioned in the video when I kind of unboxed him and told you about the project, is to produce more red Het Axanthic Crested Geckos, and along with hopefully eventually some Axanthics as well. And I would say up to this point, now about a year and a half later, my goal remains the same. I would still like to produce red Het Axanthic geckos along with hopefully some phantom Axanthics one day, right? And so I bought this male and I didn't have anything to breed him with. Now, one of my friends, Rambo's Geckos, was kind enough to send some of his possible Het Axanthic females over to my house. They were around 30 grams. There was 4 of them. And so he sent these over on a loan, which is another thing that I haven't talked much about, but I thought would be a good little point for this video is Crested Gecko breeder loans. And so he sent those geckos over to my house. It was springtime, and they were roughly, I don't know, maybe 30 grams or so. So they're right on that cusp. In a couple more months, they'd be ready to breed. And these were all, I think, 66% possible Het Axanthics. And so this was great because I didn't have any Het Axanthic females, meaning that it would be impossible for me to produce any Axanthics that year without those females. I could produce some Het Axanthics or possible Het Axanthics, but really nothing more. And so my main goal to produce those red Het Axanthics along with some Axanthics was in sight now. And at that same time, I'd also been in talks with Mr. Roby over at Robbie's Reptiles to produce some 100% Het Axanthic red phantom Crested Geckos. That's a mouthful because he had a visual Axanthic male, and so I was going to send him one of my good breeder red females over to his house so he could pair those two. I would have the loan going on at my house, and it looked like I was setting it up for a great project of Het Axanthics and Axanthic Crested Geckos. And so the year went on, and I got those females up to size, 3 of them, but one of the 4, for whatever reason, just would not get past 40 grams. She was hovering like 38, 40, 38, 40, but I could just not get her above that point. I personally am uncomfortable breeding a female that small. You can kind of look at them and see they just look too small to breed, right? And my male was a big old male. He was about 60 to 65 grams, depending on his fluctuations, right? And so the other females were above 50 grams, which I felt comfortable with, but there's no way I would breed a 38 gram gecko really at all, but to especially a 62 gram gecko. That's just too big of a difference, and there's too many issues I feel like that could arise there. But anyway, that's one gecko down for the count already, but I still had the other 3. And so to make a long story short, basically, I tried to breed those geckos in any way possible, put the mood lighting on in my room, introduce them, whatever, right? And so I would introduce them in separate containers. That didn't work. My male just was not interested. I would introduce them into different tanks for a night together. That wouldn't work. It doesn't matter what kind of music and mood lighting I got going on. They're just not getting it on, right? And I would try this, and I would try introducing them for a week or 2 together, then separating, letting them rest, trying again. And this went on for multiple months, and no amount of help could get them to breed. And so eventually, this started probably in late December and went through April. Eventually, they did not mate at all, and I did not get any fertile eggs out of any of those female geckos that were at my house. And so this puts me in an awkward spot too, because remember, these geckos are here on a loan, and so Rambo's Geckos is expecting these to be bred, right? And they're not. They're just not breeding. And there's not a whole lot you can do other than trying to help them out. And so eventually, I just sent those geckos back to him. He got some nice free growth. They were all adult size then off of me. But other than that, we didn't get any babies, and we both were kind of disappointed by it. And so that's very unfortunate. And I'm thankful that in this scenario with these loans, everybody's been understanding, because you'll often see it like on Facebook about loans going horribly wrong where people are getting super angry and stuff like that. And so I only recommend doing loans with people that you really know and can trust, because there's always the chance that things are going to go awry. And when it does, and if it does, you want it to be with people you know well, so that it's hopefully not a explosive situation. But anyway, so I sent those females back to him, unfortunately, with no babies in sight. And then my last hope, because I didn't breed my male to any of females of mine because I didn't want to, put any extra stress on him of going to all these females. And 3 is already pretty good, so I didn't need to do any more. So he's pretty much out for the count, right? But I still had my female over at Robbie's house. And unfortunately, it was pretty much the opposite scenario there. His Axanthic male was a little bit smaller in this case, and my female was bigger, and so it just didn't work out there either. So I didn't get any babies from the ones at my house. I didn't get any babies from the ones at Robbie's house. And so now I have this project that I have no babies from for the year, right? And that's pretty disappointing. And so at that same time, I didn't mention this, but I also had purchased a younger Het Axanthic Lily-White later in the year. He was too small to really do anything, so that didn't work out either. But so now at this point, I have a project that completely didn't work out, a gecko that I invested quite a lot in with no babies to show for it. And so what do? Well, this is the point where I think a lot of people get very frustrated and very upset. And don't get me wrong, I was a little disappointed I didn't get any babies from it. But if this happens to you, and eventually it will, because it always does if you've been breeding for any amount of time, I'm sure you can tell me about a pair that you really wanted to work out. And of course it didn't for whatever reason, right? Maybe the female was too small and didn't get up to size. Or maybe she had a rough season the season before and you just shouldn't breed her. It just always happens, right? And so I want to give you a few things to think about to hopefully help you from getting super frustrated at this scenario. So like I say all the time, the worst thing that you can do in this scenario, I know it's frustrating, I know it's disappointing, but the worst thing that you can do is sell your geckos, quit breeding, or think to yourself, maybe gecko breeding isn't for me. This is just one of the things that happens with gecko breeding. I know it's frustrating, but it's just one of those things you have to accept. And unfortunately, the game of gecko breeding is basically a game of patience, because everything in gecko breeding takes time. There's literally no step that's quick and fast. It's all slow and long. And so if you don't have patience, it is going to be a very hard game to play. I mean, everything is a long game with gecko breeding, and so you should keep that in mind when pairing your geckos. The other unfortunate thing is that there's really nothing you can do to make the geckos physically breed. If the geckos don't want to breed, they're not going to breed, right? There's nothing you can do to get in there and make them breed, right? And you can try all these different methods and hopefully help them out, but at the end of the day, if they don't want to, you're pretty much out of luck. However, there is one thing that you can do, which has saved me in the past on other projects, and I still use to this day, and that is always trying to have a backup or multiple backups and not relying on a single gecko for a whole project. So in this case, I was basically relying on my one male for the whole Het Axanthic project. Yes, I did have my one female at Robbie's house, but that was just kind of an extra thing, right? The main project was my one male. It all relied on him. If he doesn't perform, then the whole project dies. And so in this case, the whole project did die, right? Because he didn't perform. But if you have multiple males, multiple females, it's very hard for a project to completely fail. So for example, my Red Phantom project, which is something that I've been working on for quite some time, and I've produced many geckos from, I always have multiple backups of males and females so that I never end up in this scenario. And it's basically impossible for me to not produce any red geckos in a single year anymore, just because I always have backup geckos. So for example, this has also helped me out a lot. I tend to keep more females than I do males, because you always need, one nice male to a couple nice females usually, right? And so what I'll oftentimes do is I'll always keep a sister of the female that I really want. So for example, if I have a gecko that I bred and I get some babies from, and there's some geckos I want to keep from it, If I'm going to keep one female that's really nice, I'll always pick out the second nicest sister and I'll keep her as well. That way I always have a backup, and for some reason, if something terrible happened and she passed away, got sick, or maybe was out for the count for whatever reason, I always have her sister, and that wasn't a lost season, so to speak. And so that's helped me out a lot as well. And if nothing happens and everything goes well, you also just have a second nice extra gecko, right? And this is very nice if you have a lot of space. I understand for those of you who might not have as much space, this might be more difficult, but if you can have the space and you can do this, it's going to save you a lot of time and trouble as well. Another thing to consider is that there's always the following year. So in this case, yes, my project failed for 2022 and 2023, but there's always 2023 and 2024, the following years, to breed these same geckos and create the same geckos I was hoping to. Yes, I am set back a year, and yes, I didn't get any geckos like I was hoping to this year, but there's always next year, and the year after, and the year after. It only stops if you give up on your project and you don't want to do it anymore. That's when you really lose, is if you give up on the project. Now, I may go about the project differently than I would have last year or the year before. The reason being is that when I started this project, geckos were a lot more expensive than they are now. A het Axanthic was a couple thousand, and a visual Axanthic was very expensive, but now visual Axanthics are only a couple thousand and cheaper than what I paid for my hets, right? So now I may be able to get a visual Axanthic and speed up the process of what I was actually hoping to create. So in some ways, that worked out a lot in my favor. Yes, I did lose technically some money on the project for now, but I still have interest in the project, and so it's really not a loss at all. And so this is also something to keep in mind, is that you may have to pivot if it fails one year on what you're actually working with, but you can still achieve the same outcome, and it might actually work in your favor like it might in this case for me. My final thoughts that I'd like to leave you with is, if you still have interest in the project, just keep chugging along. I guarantee you can achieve what you are hoping to achieve. Yes, it may take a little bit longer than you are hoping, but you can get there, so just keep pushing along. If it's something that you no longer have interest in, personally, I have no problem selling off projects that I got into that I was no longer interested in, or things change, plans change, whatever the reason is, because of course the last thing you want to be doing is spending a bunch of time, a lot of effort, working out with geckos and producing geckos that you have no interest in. That just doesn't make sense, right? And so if you have a project that you got into that you're no longer interested in, maybe you should consider the direction of where you're going and what you would like to produce, and maybe it's not worth holding on to that project anymore, even if it was something that you once had interest in. As far as breeder loans go, this is something I could probably make a whole video on, but just make sure if you are doing a breeder loan, number one, you are 1000% certain that it is with someone that you can trust, and someone that if things go bad or go wrong, or you don't produce any geckos or whatever the case is, that you can trust that it's not going to turn into a situation that you're really going to regret in the future. I'm so thankful for the people I've partnered with this year that it didn't turn into that at all, and so I appreciate them for that. But just make sure if you're doing breeder loans, you're being very cautious, and that you have some type of plan or some type of hope and goal that you both are on the same page about what's supposed to happen and what you're going to produce and how it's going to get divvied up. I see this all the time on Facebook, and especially in the old days, I used to see this a lot more of breeder loans that have gone awry and just turned into a nightmare. And so this is probably something I'll make a video on later, but just be very careful doing breeder loans. Make sure you trust the person that you're doing the breeder loan with. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found some value in it. If you did, make sure you leave a like and a comment down below. I always read all the comments and I enjoy seeing your guys' feedback. And with that being said, I hope to see you in my next video.